This is part 2 of my response to Shoe0nHead calling out Prostasia. If you haven't watched the first part, I strongly suggest watching that, because my comments make more sense when you know the context, what I have previously stated, and also what clips I have played of Shoe's video. Now I'm going to continue my response.
But don't worry, it's not all convicted sex offenders. They also have clinical psychologist Dr. James Cantor, who had to say this. Speaking as a gay man, I believe we should include the P. To do otherwise is to betray the principles that give us our rights.
But Shoe, didn't you previously say that Prostasia has no professionals working for them? Cantor is a clinical psychologist and a professor, so I guess there goes that argument. But let's see what Shoe has to say in response to his claim.
For the last f***ing time. Gay. Male. Male. Lesbian. Female. Female. Bi. Female. Male. Pedophile. Adult. Child. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with sexuality.
So this relates to how we define terms, and Shoe has this definitive view that sexual orientation has got to do with biological gender. And because she doesn't see pedophilia to relate to biological gender, she concludes that it's not a sexuality, it's not a sexual orientation, and therefore it doesn't belong to the LGBT. She goes even so far as to say it's got nothing to do with sexuality. Now I think she's in contradiction with herself with that view, and I'm going to play that clip later. But for now I just want to make this very, very simple, and probably many of you have guessed it already, this very easy criticism you can have against her position, which is that there is no one definitive objective way to define these terms. In academia, there's no consensus how you define sexuality, how you define sexual orientation. The consequence of this is that if we have a researcher who is trying to establish whether pedophilia is a sexual orientation, they have some liberty how they want to define the term. So you could say that sexual orientation is just a stable attraction to a category of people, and it's through this kind of a definition one researcher named Michael Cito arrived at his conclusion that pedophilia could basically be considered a sexual age orientation as opposed to sexual gender orientation like homosexuality. In this illustration you can sort of see how this works, how these orientations coexist, that every person basically has both an age orientation and gender orientation. One obvious advantage of this kind of a way to understand human sexuality is that this is more comprehensive than just a heterosexual, homosexual continuum. Now that we have this kind of a theoretical background for how we potentially could understand pedophilia as a sexual orientation, I'm going to just briefly discuss some of the similarities between pedophilia and what we more traditionally regard as sexual orientations, like homosexuality. For example, James Cantor, who Shoe just referred to, has shown in his research that pedophilia appears to be hardwired, that it's got to do with white matter connections inside the brain of the pedophile. And we also know from studies that homosexuality too has a biological component, that essentially the brains of gay people appear to resemble those of the opposite sex to an extent. In clinical and research settings, when pedophilia or pedophilic attractions are assessed, they are using similar methods, similar techniques as if when they were examining homosexuality, like homosexual attractions. Obviously, these conditions, like one such technique is plethysmography. Obviously, like the point I want to make here is that these conditions can't be very unlike if we can successfully use similar techniques to assess these attractions. This is, I think, very, very important point, which I don't hear many people make about, like in this debate whether pedophilia is a sexual orientation or sexuality, is that yes, we are using very, very like the very same methods as when we are assessing homosexuality. Also, studies have shown that pedophilia doesn't seem to be, it seems immutable, that there's no cure for it. Just like you can't cure gay and turn him straight, you can't cure pedophilia. You can't make him a telephile and basically probably has got to do with the way their brains are wired. So I think there is a clear relationship between the way how being gay and being pedophile appears to be hardwired, and the way how you can't reverse that kind of a so strong biological characteristic of the individual. Now, in academia, there is some debate about this. For example, Paul Fedorov argues that you can cure a pedophile, but he's in the minority. The vast majority of researchers think it's a stable condition, like homosexuality. And finally, according to research, it seems that pedophiles experience these romantic sentiments toward children. Like, they experience what I guess we could call love to kids, the object of their preference. Now, this is exactly what we would expect if it were a true sexual orientation, as opposed to, let's say, a fetish. As far as I know, and I could be wrong about this because I'm not an expert on fetishes, but it seems like fetishes are a bit more superficial in this respect. Like, there is no romantic component to having a fetish, it's just purely sexual. Now, the implication of this, that pedophiles experience feelings of love and romantic sentiment toward kids, is that it seems that the substance of pedophilic attraction, not the object, but the substance, appears to be very similar, if not identical, to that of homosexual attraction or telephilia. In other words, it seems that pedophiles are attracted to kids like a telephile is attracted to adults. So the purpose of this short medley of similarities was just to point out that there exist arguments for why you could potentially consider pedophilia a type of sexual orientation, though fundamentally it still boils down to just how we want to define these terms. I'm going to move on just in a like few seconds, but I just have this one final point I want to make. Sorry for taking so much of your time, but I just feel that this is something I also wanna point out. So we know that there's something off with Shoe's argument, but just when we observe the use of our language, like when a pedophile molests a child, like if they do, I'm saying they all are going to do that eventually, but if they molest a child, we consider that a sexual offense. Now, if the term sexuality is only meaningful in relation to biological gender, we couldn't say that's an example of sexual offense. But I'm sure even Shoe would understand that that is a sexual offense, precisely because we don't have to understand sexuality or the word sex or all the variants of it in relation to biological gender. It's only in this specific circumstance that Shoe fixates on this one very narrow view to understand sexuality. And this is just something I want to point out, but now we can move on.
But like, I know this is a weak comparison, but seriously, this would be like making any one of my sick fetishes part of the LGBTQ alphabet. Like, yeah guys, we need to add S to LGBT. Lesbian, gay, bi, trans, spit in my mouth. It's not how that works.
So Shoe regards pedophilia as a fetish. That's her position. Now, I already touched on this a while ago when I just basically made the point that fetishes are purely sexual, it seems, whereas pedophilia has these other components like feelings of love, for example. But there are other reasons why you probably wouldn't consider pedophilia a fetish. Like, it's hardwired. We usually think of fetishes as psychological, that they are conditioned or programmed. We don't usually think of fetishes as the result of the physical structure of the brain. And thirdly, you could make the point that fetishes are usually related to like a circumstance or like a piece of clothing. They are not like stable preferences to a category of people or beings or things. They are very, very different conceptually. Like if you have a leather fetish, you are not attracted to leather itself in a sense. Like you're attracted to people when they wear leather. You don't like it's not a being you're attracted to. And if someone has a rape fetish, again, it's an attraction. Like, it's not an attraction, it's just they are turned on by a circumstance. And it's very different from actually being attracted to a category of people or things or beings.
I actually found the director of the organization. Meet Noah Berlatsky, the main character of this story. Now, our friend Noah has some interesting takes. Pedophiles are essentially a stigmatized group. Certain people get designated as deviants. People hate them. Yes. And parents are tyrants. Parents is an oppressive class, like rich people, or white people. He also wrote a few blogs on the Prostasia website. Child sex workers' biggest threat, the police. Okay, let's back up for a second. There's no such thing as a child sex worker, Noah. That's called a human trafficking victim.
Now, I'm going to comment on that last one because I think there are some misunderstandings here. I'm pretty sure Shoe hasn't read the article, the blog. I think she just got this from her source, Anna Slash, because she also complains about that article. This is what Slash writes. Most recently, writer Noah Berlatsky was taken in as a director at Prostasia. Berlatsky previously came under fire for writing an article published in New Republic under the title Child Sex Workers' Biggest Threat, the Police, in which he lamented the treatment of children engaged in survival sex by police officers. While fighting corruption within the justice system is certainly a valid issue, at no point did Berlatsky note the obvious fact that children cannot consent to sexual activity of any kind, instead spending his article suggesting that children forced into prostitution were willing participants in an oppressed but legitimate trade. This is just so horribly dishonest paraphrase about what Berlatsky wrote. And also, Berlatsky agrees that it's a sex trafficking, and I'm going to just respond to both Shoe and Anna Slash by just reading just two excerpts from what Berlatsky actually writes to prove that both of them are just being dishonest here. They are just, Shoe hasn't read the article, I'm pretty sure, and Slash is just lying through her teeth. These are two excerpts from Berlatsky's article. Because of the threat of abuse and imprisonment from law enforcement, minors engaged in survival sex are afraid to go to the police when they do need help. In her book, Lutnick quotes Leah Albright Bird, a survivor of sex trafficking, who says, "I was exploited from 14 to 18, and in 4 years I did not have one encounter with law enforcement that could have led to my escape from my exploiter." So notice, Shoe, that yes, Berlatsky agrees it's sex trafficking. That's what he literally wrote there. Young people's involvement in trading sex needs to be decriminalized, Lutnick told me. No one under the age of 18 should be arrested for this. The social issue will not be solved by arresting and prosecuting youth. So clearly there's no agenda in this article to in any way rationalize sexual exploitation of children or men purchasing sex from minors in any way. Like there's absolutely no indication that that's the goal of the article. Instead, the goal is, I mean, for example, they use in that article terms exploit, social issue, survivor, sex trafficking. Does this sound like they are making it seem that it is a legitimate trade, like Slash lies there? No, the point of the article is just to say that like the problem shouldn't probably be solved by persecuting the victims, the youth. They're not saying that it should be decriminalized from adults to buy sex from children. No, they are saying that the victims shouldn't be punished for these kinds of things, because like, why would you punish the victim? Why would you sentence the victim? Why would you make him suffer even more? That's the point of the article. So how could you both like miss it so completely?
This one is called The Science Behind Adolescent Autonomy. Should a 15-year-old be able to vote? Should a 13-year-old be able to decide when to go to bed? Should a 16-year-old be able to decide to sex with their significant other? Should a 12-year-old be allowed to choose what to eat and what not to eat for dinner? Rather than outsourcing our ethics and ill-informed readings of neuroscience data, we need to acknowledge that the real corrupter of judgment, of kindness, of tolerance, is power. If we refuse to let young people advocate for themselves, or refuse to grant them bodily autonomy, it is not because there is something wrong with their decision-making capacity, it is because there is something wrong with ours. Therefore, let me touch your children. No f***ing idea what he's getting at here.
Right, but see, this is one difference between me and Shoe0nHead. Like, I also have no idea where he's getting at, like what's his main point here, but that's the thing, like that's why I don't assume bunch of shit. I don't just jump to the worst possible implication of his words like Shoe does here.
So let's go back to that MAP support group. Let's read a little more about it. Community rules. 1. You must be committed to never engaging in sexual activity with a child. Well, f***ing organization already broke rule number 1.
So I may have misheard Shoe here, but did she just say that the organization has broken the rule? Why? Because there are ex-sex offenders involved? Now, I'm not saying that such individuals are necessarily safe around children, but like it's a possibility that people can change. And if they haven't committed any crimes since they joined the organization and they are genuinely invested in change for the better, I don't see a contradiction, to be honest. So yes, I'm not a big fan of this thinking that once a sex offender, always a sex offender, because that would be like saying once a meat eater, always a meat eater. So I don't want to undermine the act of child molestation, but at the same time, I think it goes a bit too far to assert that, well, such individuals are destined to keep advocating for those acts or repeating them.
Rule number 2. You must be at least 13 years old to join this chat. In case you missed that, 13 years old. So that means there are whole ass adults who admit they are attracted to children in private chat rooms with children. I'm going to commit a war crime. I am going to commit several war crimes.
So let me get this straight. There are Shoe thinks that there is some real legitimate threat of children being groomed in this organization. Like, if these pedophiles are going to tell they're attracted to children, like warn them, isn't that kind of far-fetched to think that, well, at the same time they are at the risk? Like, these pedos literally warn them by telling they're attracted to kids. I mean, seriously? A support group for pedophiles? Is this the way? Like, is this the new thing kids do nowadays? Like, as far as like when I checked, like they are into Minecraft and ponies and shit like that. So, like, is that a thing nowadays with kids that they go to support forums for pedophiles and these pedos then warn these kids and they're supposedly at the risk there? I mean, like, how far-fetched is this theory, for fuck's sake?
So here's a screen cap of apparently what goes on in said chats. What's your age of attraction? Little boys are perfect. I think 1 to 7. Mine's 1 to 10. As long as it's before puberty, pretty much. Just an innocent support club dedicated to protecting children. My f***ing ass.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's a support group for pedophiles. What do you expect them to talk about there? They're going to talk about their pedophilia, just like if we have a support group for alcoholics, they're going to talk about their alcoholism. If we have a support group for game addicts, they're going to talk about, guess what? Their fucking game addiction. I mean, there really is no mystery here, Shoe. Now, perhaps Shoe is making this kind of an implication, or like this is what she really thinks. She thinks that these pedophiles are making these comments and it doesn't sound like they are ashamed of their condition, which brings us to the question, should they be? I mean, it's literally something they can do nothing about. It's like, does it make sense to be ashamed of something you can literally do nothing about? I mean, wouldn't it be a bit more productive to try to like learn ways to live with that condition, to try to find sexual outlets, to try to like do something about what they can actually do, which is to find ways to navigate through their life while not causing victims. That's the first priority, but also like how can they manage it and still live fulfilling lives. Like, these are things they can actually influence, not like whether they have that sexuality or not.
Hey, so I'm actually editing this video right now, and while I was collecting screen caps, I saw an address at the bottom of their website, and so I was curious, and I Googled it, and I swear to fucking God, right across the street from the building, listed on their website, is an elementary school. There's the elementary school, and there's the building. There's their building, there's the elementary school. 200 feet away. No, really, what the f is this? You couldn't even write this. I don't like it. Sorry, I don't like it. I don't like the vibes. Bad vibes.
So, Shu, what do you mean you couldn't even write this shit? I'm pretty sure you could. I'm pretty sure you could write a lot worse than this. If you have watched any films or TV series where there are these pedophile characters, they are capable of pretty bad things. They don't just like live next to a building, a school. I mean, it would be kind of cool if this is what the worst of the worst pedophiles do, is they just live next to buildings. But that's not the reality we live in, Shu. And just bear in mind that this is probably, like, it's needless to say, and it's probably obvious for everyone, you, or at least most of you, maybe you're Shoes fans, in which case I don't wanna like overestimate your critical thinking capacity or anything. Sorry, but I'm just saying that it should be obvious she's cherry picking here the worst example she could find about this organization. Like, this material she presents is supposed to convince us that there's something wrong with this organization. Why? Because there is potentially a pedophile behind an address, and he lives next to a building. That's all we know about that person. Not even that, like, we don't even know that that person is a pedophile who actually watches those children through his window. Like, he could just like close his eyes, like, I'm just gonna commit a thought crime here. So we don't even know that, and still this is supposed to be the worst of the worst. I mean, how weak is her point? How weak is her video? And still people reward it by, you know, giving those little thumbs up and shit. Like, fuck, so bad.
They have a forum. Let us now go! Read the big-brained discussion. I commonly hear the phrase, insert sexual activity, should be legal, as long as it's done between consenting adults. What does Prostasia think about the possibility of instead using the term consenting persons? Consenting adults is an unrealistically exclusionary term. But changing subjects, do you know the age of consent here in Brazil is 14 years old? That's an interesting fact, isn't it?
Okay, I'm not gonna lie here. Some of those statements are a bit suspicious, like not like in an overt way. Not like that's the thing. They are ambiguous. They are not unambiguous. And I agree. Like, there's some suspicious comments amidst them. What I would like to point out is that Shoe doesn't give any context here. She doesn't sometimes sometimes she doesn't even show the entire post. Like, she crops out the edges of the post, or like what was said before, what was said after. So she doesn't like let us know of the, you know, the bigger message. Like, what's the point of the person making that kind of an argument. And she doesn't show how the community reacts to them either. Like, if we are not just individually like cherry picking these individuals, but instead, like, if we set out to actually condemn the whole community, it's kind of important to know how the community reacts to these posts, to know whether they agree with them, whether they ask some clarification or something. I think she would have an argument if there were real unambiguous statements saying it's okay to have sex with children, and then the community, like, it's not just one individual post, but the responses to that kind of an argument would be positive. They would be like encouraging, they would be affirming it.
Pedophiles are usually friendly and happy. Sometimes they do things they shouldn't, like breaking some law, but they usually try to reduce that to a minimum whenever possible. Oh my god. Ped means child. Phile is lover. Phile doesn't actually refer to pure sexual. Cope. Officer, you don't understand. I am in love with the 2-year-old.
So once again, we have these sort of ambiguous statements that she wants us to see. I'm not going to dwell on that because I already made my point regarding all that shit. Like, instead, I want to draw your attention to something else. In this like last point she makes, or the last post she reads and reacts to, she has a problem with this map, arguing basically that pedophilia is not solely sexual, and she jumped on that because apparently now she thinks that pedophilia is solely sexual, even though a while ago, like when she reacted to James Cantor's opinion that pedophilia should be into LGBT, didn't she make the exact opposite claim, saying it has got nothing to do with sexuality? Like, isn't that like the most blatant contradiction you could make?
Obscenity laws, in and of themselves, should be abolished.
I guess I'm gonna try to clarify here something, because there might be some people who don't know what's the difference between obscenity laws and the real child porn banning laws. And essentially, I don't want people to get the impression that the person in Shoe's screen cap is saying we should get rid of the laws banning child porn. That's not his argument. This is from the wiki page for the obscenity laws in the USA. Child pornography is widely considered extremely obscene. However, the Supreme Court case New York vs. Ferber established that such material does not have to be found legally obscene to be prohibited, and offenses relating to child pornography are separate from obscenity. Also, in the same wiki page, you can actually find real criticism against obscenity laws. Like, for example, they are vague, they are subjective, so there are real reasons to potentially have a problem with obscenity laws. So again, like, there's nothing radical about his position, even though Shoe tries to imply there is.
I think we have lost the war. What war, you may ask? The war for sexual rights, of course. They can't understand that pedophilia is an entirely made-up word. They can't understand that a majority of rapes are made by someone the child already knows. Rapes in quotes.
Yeah, the point about pedophilia being a made-up word is kind of silly. All words are made up. So not all of their comments are great or eloquent. That's pretty much only thing you've proven so far, Shoe. The real deal would be to demonstrate that the organization as a whole, as a collective, have a nefarious agenda, that they aren't true to their stated principles or goals, that they aren't invested in preserving children's welfare. That would be the thing to actually show us, instead of this cherry-picked shit without context. Like, there's even this one part in her video where she shows these results for this one quiz where they ask, like, where would you like to move to, and then she shows these answers where some pedophiles say they would like to move to Japan, and it implies that they want to move there because of the age of consent, which supposedly is 13, which it even isn't. Like, it's higher, really. Like, it depends on the area of the Japan, but it's never in practical terms that low. But we don't even know why they would want to move there. Maybe they like the food, I don't know. But what's like important here is that she doesn't reveal us the distribution of the results, because that's the most meaningful thing. Because if there are a bunch of answers, you can always cherry pick the worst examples, the countries with the lowest age of consent, if you're going to make that argument. But what's more interesting, like scientifically, what makes more sense, if you are going to have any kind of a rigorous argument, you would show the distribution, and then based on that distribution, make this kind of an argument. But besides, like, the age of consent, it's a real there's real discussion to be had, like where the age of consent should be. It's not objectively factual, like where is the right age of consent. Maybe it's 16, maybe it's 15. I mean, you know, if someone, like if a pedophile thinks age of consent should be 14, now there are actually countries where it is 14. Now, are all the people in those countries evil monsters? Should we call them out because they think age of consent should be lower than what it is in your country, Shoe? I mean, these are real discussions, real debates you could have. But you don't do that. You don't debate. You have no interest in, like, the arguments they make or debunking anything they say.
Prostasia doesn't have a victim focus at all. All of their energy goes towards the normalization and the acceptance of pedophilia, hiding behind the left's language of social justice and the more libertarian right's language of free speech. They're basically just trying to hijack parts of every movement.
Right, this is another one of Shoe's interesting theories. Now, I already touched on this in my previous video response to her, where I just pointed out that she's very big on this use of loaded language in place of an actual argument. So here, for example, she says that pedophiles are hiding behind the left's language of social justice. She asserts they are hijacking parts of every movement, which, I mean, these are not neutral word choices. And essentially that means that they have this value judgment embedded in them. For example, like if you are hijacking something, that means you can have like a terrorist agenda. You have at least a dishonest motive. If you're hiding behind something, like again, that implies dishonesty. There's a nefarious agenda. Now, these are things Shoe doesn't demonstrate, and it's precisely because of this, like, loaded language is considered fallacy. Just stating something through rhetoric is very different from actually forming a coherent argument and demonstrating that what you say is correct.
So when I brought this up on Twitter, somebody who followed me was like, this is cancel culture. They were confused. They didn't understand why I was going on this witch hunt against an organization that was clearly, you know, just trying to help people. So I've said this in other videos before, but I was one of those people that fell for this rhetoric. I believed it until I did more digging.
Sadly, we don't get to hear like what Shoe uncovered when she did this digging. Like, what did she unearth? Some kind of a brilliant anti-pedo argument that made her change her mind? I mean, it seems she's implying here that there once was a time perhaps when she felt, I guess, some amount of compassion even toward individuals with this unfortunate attraction to younger people. That once perhaps she was of the opinion that there is a meaningful distinction between being a pedophile and child molester, and thought that, well, maybe it's a worthwhile cause to sort of spread that awareness. Maybe she thought that all pedophiles shouldn't be painted with the same brush, that they are not all to be blamed for the actions of some pedophiles. We understand that generalizing members of minorities is usually frowned upon. Like, if a black commits a crime, we understand, a sort of a rational person understand that perhaps they aren't all to be blamed for that. Like, I'm just saying that we should extend this kind of a courtesy to pedophiles as well, and recognize that, yes, we should judge them on an individual basis. Like, is that too much asked? So I'm just wondering what made Shoe change her mind here.
You believe that there's good in everyone. You believe in rehabilitation. So do I. Tolerance is a great thing. But there's a line. And this is the line. We do not have to tolerate everything. Do not let these people take advantage of your kindness. That is the most serious I will ever be on this channel.
Well, that was anticlimactic. So, about this whole thing that we shouldn't tolerate everything. Well, are there actual people who say we should? So, I mean, sometimes people bring this up, that we shouldn't tolerate everything. Well, duh. I mean, are there anyone who disagrees with that? I mean, there are no maps who say that we should tolerate, like, literally everything. Like cannibalizing children or something. So isn't that a straw man? Besides, Shoe doesn't provide any kind of reasoning why the line should be drawn there. I'm assuming she's talking about being a pedophile. She thinks the line should be drawn there. That's something we shouldn't allow. Well, I mean, the law already allows it. That's just like one thing. Like, we have this, our justice systems are kind of an example of this fact that we don't have to draw the line on being a pedophile. We can just draw the line on actually committing harmful acts. That's another thing. Like, if these antis think it's such an immoral thing to be a pedophile, why not try to change the law and make it illegal to be one? I mean, that's something I sometimes ask these individuals, and they never answer. And the reason for this is because like, the rational answer, it would be something like, well, it's not fair to judge someone for something they literally can't help. Which is like, yeah, that's sort of the argument I'm trying to make here. So we're pretty much done here. It's at the end, it's really up to you to make your own decision or your own conclusion, whether you think Shoe provided here sufficient evidence that Prostasia is not a legitimate organization, that Prostasia is doing more harm than good. In my opinion, she failed to demonstrate that, but what's clear here is that Prostasia has a very different approach to solving this issue, to preventing sexual offenses against children, than Shoe. And that's pretty much the only thing she demonstrated here, in my opinion. Before I go, I'd just like to thank my subscribers. You have been very, very patient. I'm not uploading videos very regularly. I'm trying to improve when it comes to that and post more often. So at least you know that I haven't quit, because I have no intention of quitting. There's still, you know, lots of things I want to say, and even though I'm not doing this to get subscribers, you know, I still have to say that it does motivate to know that there are people who are like interested in what I have to say about these things. So I just want to say thank you. That's all I have. Thanks for listening.